Hello, this Des 450 demo will cover the introduction to SolidWorks and then get into sketches specifically, which is a feature that all the 3D elements of SolidWorks are based off of. Firstly, navigation within SolidWorks. I'm using the center mouse wheel to zoom in and out, and then clicking down to tumble the model. We can see our model in our center window here. This is also referred to as a solid body. At the top, we have our different features. This specific area is referred to as the command manager, where we can select through the different tabs for the different commands. And on the left here is the feature tree, which is a main aspect of SolidWorks. You can think of it as a permanent Photoshop history that allows you to go in and make changes and edit as you see fit to change your design, your proportion, as you work on your model. This file is known as a part file. It's one of three major files within SolidWorks, and it's mainly what is worked within. An assembly file is sort of like a collection of part files. So in this case, we can see an assembly file here that has three of these bottles placed. More typically, though, it's used for like the cap being built as its own part and the bottle being built as its own part and then being brought together in an assembly file. And typically that's kind of like a more engineering way to work within SolidWorks. The final file type is drawing, which is as described. It's often used for creating orthographics. So here we can see it looks like a sheet of paper. I can insert a drawing view of this bottle, and often it's just kind of a seamless way to create these orthographic views, something you might use for production or communicating with manufacturing. Useful thing to have. So like I mentioned, all the 3D aspects of SolidWorks are started as sketches. You can think of a sketch like a real-world sketch. It's a drawing on a piece of paper, except in SolidWorks it happens on a plane or a face of a solid body. The sketch features work very similar to Adobe Illustrator. But once you have your sketch, you then apply a feature to it. So in this case, the example is extrude. So whatever shape you have, it kind of pushes it into a 3D shape. Now, often whatever positive feature there is a negative version of it. So in this case, for the positive extrude, there is a negative extrude cut, which removes solid bodies. And these features is, again, what's used to create a three-dimensional shape. In this case, with the bottle, the main feature used for its construction is revolve. So if I edit this sketch here, we can see that this sketch is spun around its center to create the shape. If I edit the feature, we can look at what's called the property manager here on the left, and we can kind of change the rules. So I can make it change the degree to be half a bottle. I can have it start its rotation from the center. But this is how you can tweak your model and make adjustments after the fact. So like I mentioned, these 3D features are based on sketches, and sketches are quite powerful because if they are understood and approached systematically, you can make design changes as you see fit. So for example, as you're working on your design, if you maybe want to tweak the proportion, maybe the bottle looks a little bit too wide, you can come in here to an early sketch and change the overall width. And again, if the sketch rules are approached properly, your model should rebuild. And you can get a quick look at what it would look like if the proportion changed. And so this transitions us into the next aspect of this demo and the main focus, which is looking at sketches, again, as to their importance. Now, before we get too far into sketches, I want to mention how SolidWorks works. So right now we're kind of in this solid body mode, but as we edit sketches, we enter what I refer to as sketch world. And an analogy I use to talk about this is to think of it like Stranger Things or even Inception. Sketch World looks similar, but it's different. So it's like the upside down of Stranger Things. Or Inception is kind of like entering this like second layer of reality within SolidWorks. So you can see when I go to edit any of these sketches, for example, let's say I want to edit the bottle, you can see that everything else kind of fades away and the sketch gets colored black. And that's the first way that I know that I'm in sketch world, is the sketch will have a color to it. If I turn the other sketches to be visible, you can see they're gray. And so those are different sketch worlds, or like different levels of inception that I'm not currently within. I'm only currently in this sketch. The other way to know you're in a sketch is looking in this top right corner for these icons. You'll either see this X and this arrow, or you can look and see in your command manager whether the sketch feature is pressed down. So that's just an important thing to remember, that whether you are inside or outside of a sketch, or in sketch world or outside of sketch world. Okay, so we're going to create a new file. So we go File, New. If we want to use the templates we set up, we can click on Advanced, and under Files, select Part 450 and click OK. Now you'll see a new part file often, always basically comes preloaded with 3 planes, front, top, and right, and then this origin in the center, which is sort of the 0 point of your file, and it's incredibly important, which I'll talk about when we are in sketches on how to use that origin. So to create a sketch, we can select any of these planes, but in this case we'll select the top plane, and in our command manager we'll click on the Sketch tab and create a new sketch by clicking on this icon. It rotates the top plane to be perpendicular to us like a piece of paper, and now we can begin drawing in here. Firstly, I'll cover some of the basic features. The most common one is the line tool. So the way it works is you can just keep clicking to draw a shape, and when you complete the shape, it will automatically exit you out of the tool, or at least the creation of new lines. Or if you just want to create a single line, you can click the start and the end points and then simply hit escape to get rid of those lines. The next common tool is the rectangle. It defaults to clicking in 2 separate corners to draw. There are other ways to create rectangles, such as from the center. Another common tool is the circle tool. So it works like this center rectangle. You click in the center and then drag for the diameter. And then finally, there is the arc tool, where you click the start and end point and then set the radius value. But again, this one has different ways to create it. This 3-point arc is the most common. And last but not least, there is the dimension tool. The dimension tool is important because it allows you to control your sketches. Like I just showed with the bottle previously, it allows you to change the proportion when adjusted properly. You can select either endpoints or lines for your dimension. It depends what it is you're trying to control. You can enter a value in from the start, and then you can always go back and edit the value at a later time if you change your mind or want to make adjustments to your design. So dimensions are a rule that's applied to a sketch. And now these is just one of many rules, but SolidWorks, instead of using the word rule, it uses the word relations. So in these rectangles that I've created on the left here, they have been built in with automatic relationships. So for example, if I select this line here, you can see it's vertical. If I select this line here, you can see that it's horizontal. So this is one way that relationships are built in. They are added automatically. So if I create a new line, you can see if I hover it vertical, it kind of snaps to it. And it's kind of hard to see because the pencil cursor is blocking the icon. But if I drag it, you should see a yellow box lagging behind it. That's telling me a relationship is being added. Or I can snap it to horizontal, and that will add that relationship here. So that's a way that it's added automatically, or you can add it manually after the fact. So if I select this line and I can tell it to be either horizontal or vertical after the fact. Another thing to be aware of with relations is different options will appear depending on what's selected. So if I make 2 lines here, if I just select one, the only options I see are horizontal and vertical. If I click, drag, and select multiple, you can see now here I have multiple options. So for example, I can set them to be equal so that they're the same length. I could either set them to be parallel so they travel in the same direction, or I can tell them to be perpendicular so that they have a right angle relationship to each other. So depending on what you have selected, you will have different options available. So for example, I could take this line and drag it and take this endpoint and attach it to the endpoint of this arc. So this is another important relationship. I can show it here with this line. If I select this endpoint and hold down Control and select this line, you'll see I have different relationship options here. If I select coincident, it's just basically a fancy word for touching or connected. it will attach the endpoint to the line. Or if I select midpoint, it specifically attaches the endpoint to the center of the line. So no matter where this line grows or shrinks, this endpoint will always be in the center of this line. So those are other common relationship rules. Now, if you have a line and an arc here, like these ones, it also leads to other rules. So I can click and drag to select both the arc and the line, and now I see I have tangent as an option. And where I once had a corner here before, by snapping it to tangent, they now have a smooth transition. Or the way that tangent might look with a circle, again, if I select both of these, is now they're touching but not crossing. If I delete this tangency rule, I can have the line go in the center, and this should be a bit more clear as to what this rule does. You can see it snaps there. Now you'll notice that all of these features are blue. The color of a sketch is incredibly important. So if I exit Sketch World, so I'm going to go away from the upside down, you'll notice that the sketch turns gray. This means I'm now back in the right side up, so to speak, and I'm no longer in Sketch World. If I want to edit the sketch, I can either right click on this and say edit, or I can simply select it and click on this sketch icon here. Now it's blue, I know I'm back in the upside down, I'm inside Sketch World. So that's the difference between blue and gray. Now if I take a line and attach it to the origin, so in this case I select the end, I click on the endpoint as my first starting point, and now if I add an automatic relationship of vertical by clicking vertically above the origin, you can see the line is black. Black lines are defined. They have a rule applied to them. You can see, however, that hopefully that the endpoint is blue. That's because the endpoint is undefined. I can click and drag on this and it can change its length. If I hit D for dimension and add it to this line, it's now fully defined. You'll notice that the endpoint has turned black. And if I click and drag on it, it won't move because there is a dimension telling it to be 4.41 inches tall. So a black feature basically means defined. Now, like I mentioned, the origin is incredibly important. So I'm going to clear my canvas here to look at this. I'm going to select and drag and simply hit delete on my PC, or unfortunately delete or backspace doesn't work on Mac keyboards in SolidWorks, but I have Alt and P bound to delete, so that should do that for you if you have my hotkeys installed. So whenever you start a new file, you want to connect your very first sketch to the origin somehow. And the most common way this is done is like you might start with a center line, and you would click your endpoint on the origin and then click either vertically or horizontally above it. And this now is attached to the origin. Another way to work with the origin is to hover either vertically above it or horizontally to the side of it until you see these blue dotted lines. And then you can add and then when you click, it will be coincident with the origin. And again, we know it's coincident because firstly, it's black, so it's defined, but it also tells us if we highlight here, and it's coincident. The other color is yellow. Yellow simply just means selected. Another color is red, so in this case, the line is being told to be vertical. If I tell the line to be horizontal, SolidWorks doesn't like that. It's a conflicting command. It's being told to be two things that it cannot be. So SolidWorks highlights that in red to call your attention to say, hey, there's an error here. I don't know how to solve this. And the final line that I want to show visually, I'm going to create a center rectangle here, is these dotted lines. Dotted lines are lines that are set to be for construction. Simply, it means that if any feature is applied to this, so if I apply like an extrude to this, the extrude is going to ignore the lines in the center. You can see that it's only relying on the lines on the exterior to create the shape. You can also create these lines manually by simply, if you have a shape that you've drawn, you can select one of the lines and then tell it to be for construction. It's worth noting that here I have what's called a closed shape. The triangle is attached to itself, and so the center is blue. So that is telling me that if I have a feature, it will, again, like this, extrude this rectangle, or sorry, this triangle as well. But you'll notice that when I take one of these lines and turn it to be for construction, the blue goes away because now it's an open shape. It's no longer closed. So the dash line means for construction. Again, for construction is mainly used as described for constructing things. In this case, it's telling this rectangle to be centered on the origin. So just a good thing to be aware of that we will use later. So now it's time to put some of what we've learned to practice, and the goal is to create these three shapes, a square, a D, and a B, using some of these relationships and rules and making sure to attach them all to the origin to start to learn these best practices. If you'd like to explore this on your own, you can pause the video now and come back to it and I will show you the solutions. All right, so let's imagine we are in our brand new part file. I'll exit my sketch world here. And just simply delete the sketch. And so now to create a new sketch, you want to select, again, a sheet of paper on which to draw. So in this case, the top plane. I'm going to click on my sketch tab and click on the sketch icon. The first shape we need to make is a square. So I'm going to click R for rectangle. And I'm simply going to start my rectangle's corner on the origin. Again, it's important to always attach your first sketch to the origin in some way. And I mean, I can visually align a square, but it's not perfect. Again, we know the black lines are defined because they're attached to the origin. They're being told to be vertical and horizontal. The blue lines are undefined. They can move through space. In order to make a square, we need a rule to be applied. So in this case, I'm going to select this line and this line by holding Control, and I'm going to set them to be equal. Now I can hit D for dimension. To match the suggested drawing, I'm going to type in 2 inches here. And now no matter as I change my design, the proportion, maybe I want it bigger or smaller, it's always going to stay a square. So that is the first solution. If you want to make it centered on the origin, you can add a line through the middle here. And I would set this line to be for construction so that it doesn't interfere with any of our features. We can select the line and we can select the origin and tell it to be midpoint. Or a quicker path would have been to just simply create a center rectangle directly on the origin. The next shape we're going to create is a capital letter D. So I'm going to select my rectangle feature here, select the origin, and drag this up. And now I have a rectangle. The next feature I want to create is an arc. So I'm going to click A for arc, click on these 2 endpoints, and now set the radius. Now if I stop here and I change this, you can see that the radius kind of moves along as I change the size. If we want it to remain consistent, I can select the top line and the arc by holding Control and clicking on both of them, and then adding a relationship rule of tangent. And now as I drag this around and change the proportion, you can see that the relationship always stays the same. The other way that this could be created, it's just sort of a nature of geometry, would be to set the center of the arc to be coincident with this edge. And it's just because a half circle is always going to be tangent to the center line here. So that's the other way to create this. It's a good idea to set the center line to be for construction, and then you can set the height to be 2 inches. And once again, now as you change your dimensions for your design, the relationship should stay the same. All right, the final shape to make is a letter B. I can leave my rectangle because that's going to be part of this. I'm going to click A for arc. And now instead of selecting the top endpoint after selecting the bottom, I'm going to hover this line until I'm about center, and you can see that this dot appears. And again, it kind of snaps to it. And this adds an automatic relationship, if I select this line here, of midpoint. And now I can create another arc by tapping A, selecting this existing endpoint and this existing endpoint. And now I have the start of my letter B. Now, of course, the final thing to do is to select, either edge and arc to make them tangent, or again, because of the nature of geometry, I can select the center of the arc and this edge and tell them to be coincident. And now once again, when I change the size of this, it will maintain its sort of proportion in its design. If you want to dimension the horizontal, you can simply just D for dimension and add a dimension to the center line here. If you want to add an overall dimension, You could create a line here, make sure it's vertical. Whoops, I accidentally clicked, I'll do it again. So L for line, snap it vertically, so now it has the automatic relationship of vertical. I can now hold Control and select this arc and tell them to be tangent. Since I don't want this line to be part of the shape, I'm going to make it for construction. And now simply I can click D for dimension and give the overall width of this line. So now I can control the width of this. Okay, thank you for following along.